Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, by Edgar Burroughs. Chapter 1. Tanto the Elephant. His great bulk swaying to and fro as he threw his weight first upon one side and then upon the other, Tantor the elephant lolled in the shade of the father of forests, almost omnipotent he in the realm of his people. Dango, Shita, even Numa the mighty were as naught to the pachyderm. For 100 years he had come and gone up and down the land that had trembled to the comings and the goings of his forebears for countless ages. In peace he had lived with Dango the hyena, Shita the leopard, and Numa the lion. Man alone had made war upon him. Man, who holds the unique distinction among created things of making war on all living creatures, even to his own kind. Man, the ruthless man, the pitiless man, the most hated living organism that nature has evolved. Always during the long 100 years of his life, Tantor had known man. There had been black men, always. Big black warriors with spears and arrows, little black warriors, sword Arabs with crude muskets, and white men with powerful express rifles and elephant guns. The white men had been the last to come and were the worst. Yet Tantor did not hate men, not even white men. Hate, vengeance, envy, avarice, lust are a few of the delightful emotions reserved exclusively for nature's noblest work. The lower animals do not know them. Neither do they know fear as man knows it, but rather a certain bold caution that sends the antelope and the zebra, watchful and wary, to the waterhole with the lion. Tantor shared this caution with his fellows and avoided men, especially white men, and so had there been other eyes there that day to see, their possessor might almost have questioned their veracity, or attributed their error to the half-light of the forest, as they scanned the figure sprawling prone upon the rough back of the elephant, half dozing in the heat, the swaying of the great body, for, despite the sun-bronzed hide, the figure was quite evidently that of a white man. But there were no other eyes to see, and Tantor drowsed in the heat of midday, and Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, dozed upon the back of his mighty friend. A sultry air current moved sluggishly from the north, bringing to the keen nostrils of the ape-man no disquieting perception. Peace lay upon the jungle, and the two beasts were content. In the forest far Dan Motlog, of the tribe El Harb, hunted north from the Menzel of Sheikh Ibn Jad of the Beni Salem Fendi El Guad. With them were black slaves. They advanced warily and in silence upon the fresh spoor of El Fil the elephant, the thoughts of the swart Arab dwelling upon ivory, those of the black slaves upon fresh meat. The Abd Fijuan, black gala slave, sleek, Ibn warrior, eater of raw meat, famed hunter, led the others. Fijuan, as his comrades, thought of fresh meat, but also he thought of El Habash, the land from which he had been stolen as a boy. He thought of coming again to the lonely gala hut of his parents. Perhaps El Habash was not far off now. For months Ibn Jad had been traveling south, and now he had come east for a long distance. El Habash must be near. When he was sure of that, his days of slavery would be over, and Ibn Jad would have lost his best gala slave. 2 marches to the north, in the southern extremity of Abyssinia, stood the round dwelling of the father of Fijuan, almost on the roughly mapped route that Ibn Jad had planned nearly a year since, when he had undertaken this mad adventure upon the advice of a learned Sahar, a magician of repute. But of either the exact location of his father's house or the exact plans of Ibn Jad, Fijuan was equally ignorant. He but dreamed, and his dreams were flavored with raw meat. The leaves of the forest drowsed in the heat above the heads of the hunters. Beneath the drowsing leaves of other trees, a stone's throw ahead of them, Tarzan and Tantor slept, their perceptive faculties momentarily dulled by the soothing influence of fancied security and the somnolence that is a corollary of equatorial midday. Fijuan, the gala slave, halted in his tracks, stopping those behind him by the silent mandate of an upraised hand. Directly before him, seen dimly between the boles and through the foliage, swayed the giant bulk of El Fil. Fijuan motioned to Fa'd, who moved stealthily to the side of the black. The gala slave pointed through the foliage toward a patch of grey hide. Fa'd raised El Lazari, his ancient matchlock, to his shoulder. There was a flash of flame, a burst of smoke, a roar, and El Fil, unhit, was bolting through the forest. As Tantor surged forward at the sound of the report, Tarzan started to spring to an upright position, and at the same instant the pachyderm passed beneath a low-hanging limb which struck the ape-man's head, sweeping him to the ground, where he lay stunned and unconscious. Terrified, Tantor thought only of escape as he ran north through the forest, leaving in his wake felled trees, trampled or uptorn bushes. Perhaps he did not know that his friend lay helpless and injured, at the mercy of the common enemy man. Tantor never thought of Tarzan as one of the Tarmangani, for the white man was synonymous with discomfort, pain, annoyance, whereas Tarzan of the Apes meant to him restful companionship, peace, happiness, and of all the jungle beasts. Except his own kind, he fraternized with Tarzan only. Billah. Thou missed, exclaimed Feijuan. Gluck, ejaculated Fa-D. Shaitan guided the bullet, but let us see, perhaps El-Fil is hit. Nay, thou missed. The two men pushed forward, followed by their fellows, looking for the hoped-for carmine spoor. Fa-D suddenly stopped. Wella, what have we here? He cried. I fired at El-Fil and killed a Nasrani. The others crowded about. It is indeed a Christian dog, and naked too, said Motlog. Or some wild man of the forest, suggested another. Where didst thy bullet strike him, Fa-D? They stooped and rolled Tarzan over. There is no mark of bullet upon him. Is he dead? Perhaps he too hunted El-Fil and was slain by the great beast. He is not dead, announced Feijuan, who had kneeled and placed an ear above the ape-man's heart. He lives, and from the mark upon his head, I think, but temporarily out of his wits from a blow. See, he lies in the path that El-Fil made when he ran away. He was struck down in the brute's flight. I will finish him, said Fard, drawing his kusa. Biola, no, put back thy knife, Fard, said Motlog. Let the sheikh say if he shall be killed. Thou art always too eager for blood. It is but a Nasrani, insisted Fa-D. Think thou to carry him back to the menzil. He moves, said Feijuan. Presently he will be able to walk there without help, but perhaps he will not come with us. And look, he hath the size and muscles of a giant. Wella, what a man. Bind him, commanded Fard. So with thongs of camel hide they made the ape-man's two wrists secure together across his belly, nor was the work completed any too soon. They had scarce done when Tarzan opened his eyes and looked them slowly over. He shook his head like some great lion, and presently his senses cleared. He recognized the Arab instantly for what they were. Why are my wrists bound? He asked them in their own tongue. Remove the thongs. Fa-D laughed. Thinkest thou, Nasrani, that thou art some great sheikh, that thou canst order about the Biju as they were dogs? I am Tarzan, replied the ape-man, as one might say I am the sheikh of sheikhs. Tarzan, exclaimed Motlog. He drew Fard aside. Of all men, he said, lowering his voice, that it should be our ill fortune to offend this one. In every village that we have entered in the past 2 weeks we have heard his name. Wait, they have said, until Tarzan, lord of the jungle, returns. He will slay you when he learns that you have taken slaves in his country. When I drew my kusa thou shouldst not have stopped my hand, Motlog, complained Fard, but it is not too late yet. He placed his hand upon the hilt of his knife. Billah, nay, cried Motlog. We have taken slaves in this country. They are with us now, and some of them will escape. Suppose they carry word to the Fendi of this great sheikh that we have slain him? Not one of us will live to return to Bilelguad. Let us then take him before Ibn Jad, that the responsibility may be his, said Fa-D. Well, you speak wisely, replied Motlog. What the sheikh doeth with this man is the sheikh's business. Come. As they returned to where Tarzan stood, he eyed them questioningly. What have you decided to do with me? He demanded. If you are wise, you will cut these bonds and lead me to your sheikh. I wish a word with him. We are only poor men, said Motlog. It is not for us to say what shall be done, and so we shall take you to our sheikh, who will decide. The Sheikh Ibn Jad of the Fendi El Guad squatted in the open men's compartment of his Bait Seyshar, and beside him in the mukad of his house of hair sat Tolog, his brother, and a young Bedouin Zaid, who, doubtless, found less attraction in the company of the sheikh than in the proximity of the sheikh's harem, whose quarters were separated from the mukad only by a breast-high curtain suspended between the waist poles of the Bait, affording thus an occasional glimpse of Atija, the daughter of Ibn Jad. That it also afforded an occasional glimpse of Herfa, his wife, raised not the temperature of Zaid an iota. As the men talked, the two women were busy within their apartment at their housewifely duties. In a great brazen jiddah, Herfa was placing mutton to be boiled for the next meal, while Atija fashioned sandals from an old bag of camel leather impregnated with the juice of the dates that it had borne upon many a rala, and meanwhile they missed naught of the conversation that passed in the mukad. We have come a long way without mishap from our own Belid. Ibn Jad was remarking, and the way has been longer because I wish not to pass through El-Habash lest we be set upon or followed by the people of that country. Now may we turn north again and enter El-Habash close to the spot where the magician foretold we should find the treasure city of Nimr. And thinkest thou to find this fabled city easily once we are within the boundaries of El-Habash? Asked Tolog, his brother. Well, yes, it is known to the people of this far south Habash. Fejuan himself, an Habashi, though he has never been there, heard of it as a boy. We shall take prisoners among them, and by the grace of Allah we shall find the means to loose their tongues and have the truth from them. By Allah, I hope it does not prove like the treasure that lies upon the great rock El-Hawara in the plain of Medan, Sally, said Zaid. An Efrit guards it where it lays sealed in a stone tower, and they say that should it be removed, disaster would befall mankind, for men would turn upon their friends and even upon their brothers, the sons of their fathers and mothers, and the kings of the world would give battle, one against another. Yea, testified Tolog, I had it from one of the Fendi Hazim that a wise Moghrabi came by there in his travels, and consulting the Kabbalistic signs in his book of magic discovered that indeed the treasure lay there. But none dared take it up, said Zaid. Billah, exclaimed Ibn Jad, there be no Efrit guarding the treasures of Nimr, naught but flesh and blood Habash that may be laid low with ball and powder. The treasure is ours for the taking. Allah grant that it may be as easily found as the treasure of Guerrier, said Zaid, which lays a journey north of Tibuk in the ancient ruins of a walled city. There, each Friday the pieces of money roll out of the ground and run about over the desert until sunset. Once we are come to Nimr, there will be no difficulty finding the treasure, Ibn Jad assured them. The difficulty will lie in getting out of El-Habash with the treasure and the woman, and if she is as beautiful as the Sahar said, the men of Nimr may protect her even more savagely than they would the treasure. Often do magicians lie, said Tolog. Who comes, exclaimed Ibn Jad, looking toward the jungle that hemmed the Menzil upon all sides. Billah, it is Fa Dan Motlog returning from the hunt, said Tolog. Allah grant that they bring ivory and meat. They return too soon, said Zaid. But they do not come empty-handed, and Ibn Jad pointed toward the naked giant that accompanied the returning hunters. The group surrounding Tarzan approached the sheik's bait and halted. Wrapped in his soiled calico thob, his head kerchief drawn across the lower part of his face, Ibn Jad exposed but two villainous eyes to the intense scrutiny of the ape-man, which simultaneously included the pock-marked, shifty-eyed visage of Tolog, the sheik's brother, and the not ill-favored countenance of the youthful Zaid. Who is Sheikh here? Demanded Tarzan in tones of authority that belied the camel-leather thongs about his wrists. Ibn Jad permitted his thorab to fall from before his face. Well, I am Sheikh, he said, and by what name art thou known, Nasrani? They call me Tarzan of the Apes, Muslim. Tarzan of the Apes, mused Ibn Jad. I have heard the name. Doubtless. It is not unknown to Arab slave raiders. Why then came you to my country, knowing I do not permit my people to be taken into slavery? We do not come for slaves, Ibn Jad assured him. We do but trade in peace for ivory. Thou liest in thy beard, Muslim, returned Tarzan, quietly. I recognize both Menuema and Gala slaves in thy Menzil, and I know that they are not here of their own choosing. Then, too, was I not present when your henchmen fired a shot at El-Fil? Is that peaceful trading for ivory? No, it is poaching. And that Tarzan of the Apes does not permit in his country. You are raiders and poachers. By Allah, we are honest men, cried Ibn Jad. Fa'did and Motlog did but hunt for meat. If they shot El-Fil, it must be that they mistook him for another beast. Sure enough, cried Tarzan. Remove the thongs that bind me and prepare to return north from whence thou came. Thou shalt have an escort and bearers to the Sudan. These will I arrange for. We have come a long way and wish only to trade in peace, insisted Ibn Jad. We shall pay our bearers for their labor and take no slaves, nor shall we again fire upon El-Fil. Let us go our way, and when we return we will pay you well for permission to pass through your country. Tarzan shook his head. No, you shall go at once. Come, cut these bonds. Ibn Jad's eyes narrowed. We have offered thee peace and profits, Nasrani, he said, but if thou wouldst have war, let it be war. Thou art in our power, and remember that dead enemies are harmless. Think it over. And to Fad, take him away and bind his feet. Be careful, Muslim, warned Tarzan. The arms of the ape-man are long, they may reach out even in death, and their fingers encircle your throat. Thou shalt have until dark to decide, Nasrani, and thou mayest know that Ibn Jad will not turn back until he hath that for which he came. They took Tarzan then, and at a distance from the bite of Ibn Jad they pushed him into a small hijra, but once within this tent it required 3 men to throw him to the ground and bind his ankles, even though his wrists were already bound. In the bite of the sheikh the Bedouins sipped their coffee, sickish with clove, cinnamon and other spice, the while they discussed the ill fortune that had befallen them, for, regardless of his bravado, Ibn Jad knew full well that only speed and most propitious circumstances could now place the seal of success upon his venture. But for Mutlog, said Fa'ad, would now have no cause for worry concerning the Nasrani, for I had my knife ready to slit the dog's throat when Mutlog interfered, and had word of his slaying spread broadcast over his country before another sunset, and all his people at our heels countered Mutlog. Wella, said Tolog, the sheikh's brother, I wish Fa'ad done the thing he wished. After all, how much better off are we if we permit the Nasrani to live? Should we free him, we know that he will gather his people and drive us from the country. If we keep him prisoner and an escaped slave carries word of it to his people, will they not be upon us even more surely than as though we had slain him? Tolog, thou speakest words of wisdom, said Ibn Jad, nodding appreciatively. But wait, said Tolog, I have within me unspoken words of even greater worth. He leaned forward, motioning the others closer, and lowered his voice. Should this one whom they call Tarzan escape during the night, or should we set him free, there would be no bad word for an escaped slave to bear to his people. Billah, exclaimed Fa'ad disgustedly, there would be no need for an escaped slave to bring word to his people. The Nasrani himself would do that and lead them upon us in person. Bah, the brains of Tolog are as camel's dung. Thou hast not heard all that I would say, brother, continued Tolog, ignoring Fa'ad. It would only seem to the slaves that this man had escaped, for in the morning he would be gone, and we would make great lamentation over the matter, or we would say, Wella, it is true that Ibn Jad made peace with the stranger, who departed into the jungle, blessing him. I do not follow thee, brother, said Ibn Jad. The Nasrani lies bound in yonder hijra. The night will be dark. A slim knife between his ribs were enough. There be faithful Habash among us who will do our bidding, nor speak of the matter after. They can prepare a trench from the bottom of which a dead Tarzan may not reach out to harm us. Bayullah, it is plain that thou art of sheikhly blood, Tolog, exclaimed Ibn Jad. The wisdom of thy words proclaims it. Thou shalt attend to the whole matter. Then will it be done secretly and well. The blessings of Allah be upon thee. And Ibn Jad arose and entered the quarters of his harem. Chapter 2. Comrades of the Wild. Darkness fell upon the menzil of Ibn Jad the sheikh. Beneath the small flitting tent where his captors had left him, Tarzan still struggled with the bonds that secured his wrists, but the tough camel leather withstood even the might of his giant thews. At times he lay listening to the night noises of the jungle, many of them noises that no other human ear could have heard, and always he interpreted each correctly. He knew when Numa passed and sheeted the leopard, and then from afar, and so faintly that it was but the shadow of a whisper, there came down the wind the trumpeting of a bull elephant. Without the bite of Ibn Jad, Atija, the sheikh's daughter, loitered, and with her was Zaid. They stood very close to one another, and the man held the maiden's hands in his. Tell me, Atija, he said, that you love no other than Zaid. How many times must I tell you that, whispered the girl. And you do not love Fa'ad, insisted the man. Billah, no, she ejaculated. Yet your father gives the impression that one day you will be Fa'ad's. My father wishes me to be of the harem of Fa'ad, but I mistrust the man, and I could not belong to one whom I neither loved nor trusted. I, too, mistrust Fa'ad, said Zaid. Listen, Atija, I doubt his loyalty to thy father, and not his alone, but another whose name I durst not even whisper. Upon occasions I have seen them muttering together when they thought that there were no others about. The girl nodded her head. I know. It is not necessary even to whisper the name to me, and I hate him even as I hate Fa'ad. But he is of thine own kin, the youth reminded her. What of that? Is he not also my father's brother? If that bond does not hold him loyal to Ibn Jad, who hath treated him well, why should I pretend loyalty for him? Nay, I think him a traitor to my father. But Ibn Jad seems blind to the fact. We are a long way from our own country, and if aught should befall the Sheikh, Tolog, being next of blood, would assume the sheikhly duties and honors. I think he hath won fact support by a promise to further his suit for me with Ibn Jad. For I have noticed that Tolog exerts himself to praise Fard in the hearing of my father. And perhaps a division of the spoils of the Grazi upon the treasure city, suggested Zaid. It is not unlikely, replied the girl, and Allah, what was that? The Bedouins seated about the coffee fire leaped to their feet. The black slaves, startled, peered out into the darkness from their rude shelters. Muskets were seized. Silence fell again upon the tense, listening Menzel. The weird, uncanny cry that had unnerved them was not repeated. Billah, ejaculated Ibn Jad. It came from the midst of the Menzel, and it was the voice of a beast, where there are only men and a few domestic animals. Could it have been the speaker stopped as though fearful that the thing he would suggest might indeed be true? But he is a man, and that was the voice of a beast, insisted Ibn Jad. It could not have been he. But he is a Nasrani, reminded Fard. Perhaps he has league with Shaitan. And the sound came from the direction where he lies bound in a hedra, observed another. Come, said Ibn Jad, let us investigate. With muskets ready, the Arab, lighting the way with paper lanterns, approached the hedra where Tarzan lay. Fearfully the foremost looked within. He is here, he reported. Tarzan, who was sitting in the center of the tent, surveyed the Arab somewhat contemptuously. Ibn Jad pressed forward. You heard a cry, he demanded of the ape-man. Yes, I heard it. Camest thou, Sheikh Ibn Jad, to disturb my rest upon so trivial an errand, or camest thou to release me? What manner of cry was it? What did it signify? Asked Ibn Jad. Tarzan of the apes smiled grimly. It was but the call of a beast to one of his kind, he replied. Does the noble Bedouin tremble thus always when he hears the voices of the jungle people? Gluck, growled Ibn Jad, the Bedou fear naught. We thought the sound came from this hedra, and we hastened hither, believing some jungle beast had crept within the Menzel and attacked thee. Tomorrow it is the thought of Ibn Jad to release thee. Why not tonight? My people fear thee. They would that when you are released you depart hence immediately. I shall. I have no desire to remain in thy lice-infested Menzel. We could not send thee alone into the jungle at night, where El Adria is abroad hunting, protested the sheik. Tarzan of the apes smiled again, one of his rare smiles. Tarzan is more secure in his teeming jungle than are the Bedouin in their desert, he replied. The jungle night has no terrors for Tarzan. Tomorrow, snapped the sheik, and then, motioning to his followers, he departed. Tarzan watched their paper lanterns bobbing across the camp to the sheik's bait, and then he stretched himself at full length and pressed an ear to the ground. When the inhabitants of the Arab Menzel heard the cry of the beast shatter the quiet of the new night, it aroused within their breasts a certain vague unrest, but otherwise it was meaningless to them. Yet there was one far off in the jungle who caught the call faintly and understood. A huge beast, the great grey dreadnought of the jungle, Tanta the elephant. Again he raised his trunk aloft and trumpeted loudly. His little eyes gleamed redly wicked as, a moment later, he swung off through the forest at a rapid trot. Slowly silence fell upon the Menzel of Sheikh Ibn Jad as the Arab and their slaves sought their sleeping mats. Only the sheikh and his brother sat smoking in the sheikh's bait, smoking and whispering in low tones. Do not let the slaves see you slay the Nasrani, Tolog cautioned Ibn Jad. Attend to that yourself first in secrecy and in silence, then quietly arouse 2 of the slaves. Fijuan would be as good as another, as he has been among us since childhood and is loyal. He will do well for one. Abbas is loyal too and strong, suggested Tolog. Yeah, let him be the second, agreed Ibn Jad. But it is well that they do not know how the Nasrani came to die. Tell them that you heard a noise in the direction of his hedra, and that when you had come to learn the nature of it, you found him thus dead. You may trust to my discretion, brother, Tolog assured. And warn them to secrecy, continued the sheik. No man but we 4 must ever know of the death of the Nasrani, nor of his place of burial. In the morning we shall tell the others that he escaped during the night. Leave his cup bonds within the hedra as proof. You understand? By Allah, fully. Good. Now go. The people sleep. The sheikh rose, and Tolog also. The former entered the apartment of his harem, and the latter moved silently through the darkness of the night in the direction of the hedra where his victim lay. Through the jungle came Tantor the elephant, and from his path fled gentle beasts and fierce. Even Numa the lion slunk growling to one side as the mighty pachyderm passed. Into the darkness of the hedgerow crept Tolog, the sheik's brother, but Tarzan, lying with an ear to the ground, had heard him approaching from the moment that he had left the bait of Ibn Jad. Tarzan heard other sounds as well, and as he interpreted these others, he interpreted the stealthy approach of Tolog and was convinced when the footsteps turned into the tent where he lay, convinced of the purpose of his visitor. For what purpose but the taking of his life would a Bedouin visit Tarzan at this hour of the night? As Tolog, groping in the dark, entered the tent, Tarzan sat erect, and again there smote upon the ears of the Bedouin the horrid cry that had disturbed the Menzel earlier in the evening, but this time it arose in the very hedra in which Tolog stood. The Bedouin halted, aghast. "Ola," he cried, stepping back. "What beast is there? Nasrani, art thou being attacked?" Others in the camp were awakened, but none ventured forth to investigate. Tarzan smiled and remained silent. "Nasrani," repeated Tolog, but there was no reply. Cautiously, his knife ready in his hand, the Bedouin backed from the hedra. He listened but heard no sound from within. Running quickly to his own bait, he made a light in a paper lantern and hastened back to the hedra, and this time he carried his musket and it was at full cock. Peering within, the lantern held above his head, Tolog saw the ape-man sitting upon the ground looking at him. There was no wild beast. Then the Bedouin understood. "Billah, it wast thou, Nasrani, who made the fearful cries." "Bedoui, thou comest to kill the Nasrani, demanded Tarzan. From the jungle came the roar of a lion and the trumpeting of a bull elephant, but the boma was high and sharp with thorns, and there were guards and beast fire, so Tolog gave no thought to these familiar noises of the night. He did not answer Tarzan's question, but laid aside his musket and drew his kusa, which after all was answer enough. In the dim light of the paper lantern, Tarzan watched these preparations. He saw the cruel expression upon the malevolent face. He saw the man approaching slowly, the knife ready in his hand. The man was almost upon him now, his eyes glittering in the faint light. To the ears of the ape-man came the sound of a commotion at the far edge of the Menzel, followed by an arrow oath. Then Tolog launched a blow at Tarzan's breast. The prisoner swung his bound wrists upward and struck the Bedouin's knife arm away, and simultaneously he struggled to his knees. With an oath, Tolog struck again, and again Tarzan fended the blow, and this time he followed swiftly with a mighty sweep of his arms that struck the Bedouin upon the side of the head and sent him sprawling across the hedra, but Tolog was instantly up and at him again. This time with the ferocity of a maddened bull, yet at the same time with far greater cunning, for instead of attempting a direct frontal attack, Tolog leaped quickly around Tarzan to strike him from behind. In his effort to turn upon his knees that he might face his antagonist, the ape-man lost his balance, his feet being bound together, and fell prone at Tolog's mercy. A vicious smile bared the yellow teeth of the Bedouin. "Die, Nasrani," he cried, and then Billah. What was that? As of a sudden the entire tent was snatched from above his head and hurled off into the night. He turned quickly, and a shriek of terror burst from his lips as he saw, red-eyed and angry, the giant form of El-Fil towering above him, and in that very instant a supple trunk encircled his body, and Tolog, the sheik's brother, was raised high aloft and hurled off into the darkness as the tent had been. For an instant Tantor stood looking about, angrily, defiantly. Then he reached down and lifted Tarzan from the ground, raised him high above his head, wheeled about and trotted rapidly across the Menzel toward the jungle. A frightened sentry fired once and fled. The other sentry lay crushed and dead where Tantor had hurled him when he entered the camp. An instant later Tarzan and Tantor were swallowed by the jungle and the darkness. The Menzel of Sheikh Ibn Jad was in an uproar. Armed men hastened hither and thither, seeking the cause of the disturbance, looking for an attacking enemy. Some came to the spot where had stood the hedra, where the Nasrani had been confined, but hedra and Nasrani both had disappeared. Nearby, the bait of one of Ibn Jad's cronies lay flattened. Beneath it were screaming women and a cursing man. On top of it was Tolog, the sheikh's brother, his mouth filled with vile Bedouin invective, whereas it should have contained only praises of Allah and thanksgiving, for Tolog was indeed a most fortunate man. Had he alighted elsewhere than upon the top of a sturdily pegged bait, he had doubtless been killed or badly injured when Tantor hurled him thus rudely aside. Ibn Jad, searching for information, arrived just as Tolog was extricating himself from the folds of the tent. "Billah," cried the sheikh. What has come to pass? What, O brother, art thou doing upon the bait of Abd el-Aziz? A slave came running to the sheikh. The Nazrani is gone, and he hath taken the hedgerow with him, he cried. Ibn Jad turned to Tolog. Canst thou not explain, brother, he demanded. Is the Nazrani truly departed? The Nazrani is indeed gone, replied Tolog. He is in league with Shaitan, who came in the guise of El-Fil and carried the Nazrani into the jungle, after throwing me upon the top of the bait of Abd el-Aziz, whom I still hear squealing and cursing beneath as though it had been he who was attacked rather than I. Ibn Jad shook his head. Of course he knew that Tolog was a liar, that he always had known, yet he could not understand how his brother had come to be upon the top of the bait of Abd el-Aziz. What did the sentries see? Demanded the sheikh. Where were they? They were at their post, spoke up Motlog. I was just there. One of them is dead, the other fired upon the intruder as it escaped. And what said he of it? Demanded Ibn Jad. Well, he said that El-Fil came and entered the menzil, killing Yemeni and rushing to the hedgerow where the Nasrani lay bound, ripping it aside, throwing Tolog high into the air. Then he seized the prisoner and bore him off into the jungle, and as he passed him, Hassan fired. A missed guessed Ibn Jad. For several moments the sheikh stood in thought. Then he turned slowly toward his own bait. Tomorrow early is the Rala, he said, and the word spread quickly that early upon the morrow they would break camp. Far into the forest Tantor bore Tarzan until they had come to a small clearing well carpeted with grass, and here the elephant deposited his burden gently upon the ground and stood guard above. In the morning, said Tarzan, when Kudu the sun hunts again through the heavens and there is light by which to see, we shall discover what may be done about removing these bonds, Tantor, but for now let us sleep. Numa the lion, Dango the hyena, Sheeta the leopard passed near that night, and the scent of the helpless man-thing was strong in their nostrils, but when they saw who stood guard above Tarzan and heard the mutterings of the big bull, they passed on about their business while Tarzan of the apes slept. With the coming of dawn all was quickly astir in the menzil of Ibn Jad. Scarce was the meagre breakfast eaten ere the bite of the sheikh was taken down by his women, and at this signal the other houses of hair came tumbling to the ground, and within the hour the Arab were winding northward toward El-Habash. The Bedouins and their women were mounted upon the desert ponies that had survived the long journey from the north, while the slaves that they had brought with them from their own country marched afoot at the front and rear of the column in the capacity of askari, and these were armed with muskets. Their bearers were the natives that they had impressed into their service along the way. These carried the impedimenta of the camp and herded the goats and sheep along the trail. Zaid rode beside Atija, the daughter of the sheikh, and more often were his eyes upon her profile than upon the trail ahead. Fadi rode near Ibn Jad, cast an occasional angry glance in the direction of the two. Tolog, the sheikh's brother, saw and grinned. Zaid is a bolder suitor than thou, Fad, he whispered to the young man. He has whispered lies into her ears, and she will have none of me, complained Fad. If the sheikh favored thy suit, though, suggested Tolog. But he does not, snapped Fad. A word from you might aid. You promised it. Well, yes, but my brother is an overindulgent sire, explained Tolog. He doth not mislike you, Fad, but rather he would have his bint happy, and so leaves the selection of her mate to her. What is there to do, then, demanded Fadi. If I were sheikh, now suggested Tolog, but alas, I am not. If you were sheikh, what then? My niece would go to the man of my own choosing. But you are not sheikh, Fad reminded him. Tolog leaned close and whispered in Fad's ear. A suitor as bold as Zaid would find the way to make me sheikh. Fad Diaid made no reply but only rode on in silence, his head bowed and his brows contracted in thought. Chapter 3. The Apes of Toyat. 3 days crawled slowly out of the east and followed one another across the steaming jungle and over the edge of the world beyond. For 3 days the Arab moved slowly northward toward El-Habash. For 3 days Tarzan of the apes lay in the little clearing, bound and helpless, while Tantor the elephant stood guard above him. Once each day the great bull brought the ape-man food and water. The camel leather thongs held securely, and no outside aid appeared to release Tarzan from the ever-increasing discomfort and danger of his predicament. He had called to Manu the monkey to come and gnaw the strands apart, but Manu, ever irresponsible, had only promised and forgotten. And so the ape-man lay uncomplaining, as is the way of beasts, patiently waiting for release, knowing that it might come in the habiliment of death. Upon the morning of the fourth day, Tantor gave evidences of restlessness. His brief foragings had exhausted the nearby supply of food for himself and his charge. He wanted to move on and take Tarzan with him, but the ape-man was now convinced that to be carried farther into the elephant country would lessen his chances for succor, for he felt that the only one of the jungle people who could release him was Mangani the great ape. Tarzan knew that already he was practically at the outer limits of the Mangani country, yet there was a remote chance that a band of the great anthropoids might pass this way and discover him, while, should Tantor carry him farther north, even this meager likelihood of release would be lost forever. Tantor wanted to be gone. He nudged Tarzan with his trunk and rolled him over. He raised him from the ground. "Put me down," Tantor said the ape-man, and the pachyderm obeyed, but he turned and walked away. Tarzan watched him cross the clearing to the trees upon the far side. There Tantor hesitated, stopped, turned. He looked back at Tarzan and trumpeted. He dug up the earth with a great tusk and appeared angry. "Go and feed," said Tarzan, "and then return. Tomorrow the Mangani may come." Tantor trumpeted again and, wheeling about, disappeared in the jungle. For a long time the ape-man lay listening to the retreating footfalls of his old friend. "He is gone," he mused. "I cannot blame him. Perhaps it is as well. What matter whether it be today, tomorrow, or the day after?" The morning passed. The noonday silence lay upon the jungle. Only the insects were abroad. They annoyed Tarzan as they did the other jungle beasts, but to the poison of their stings he was immune through a lifetime of inoculation. Suddenly there came a great scampering through the trees. Little Manu and his brothers, his sisters and his cousins came trooping madly through the middle terrace, squealing, chattering and scolding. Manu called Tarzan. "What comes?" "The Mangani." "The Mangani," shrieked the monkeys. "Go and fetch them," Manu commanded the ape-man. "We are afraid." "Go and call to them from the upper terraces," urged Tarzan. "They cannot reach you there. Tell them that one of their people lies helpless here. Tell them to come and release me." "We are afraid." "They cannot reach you in the upper terraces. Go. They will be your friends then." "They cannot climb to the upper terraces," said an old monkey. "I will go." The others halted in their flight, turned and watched the grey beard as he scampered quickly off amongst the loftiest branches of the great trees, and Tarzan waited. Presently he heard the deep gutturals of his own people, the great apes, the Mangani. Perhaps there would be those among them who knew him. Perhaps again the band may have come from afar and have no knowledge of him, though that he doubted. In them, however, was his only hope. He lay there listening, waiting. He heard Manu screaming and chattering as he scampered about high above the Mangani. Then of a sudden silence fell upon the jungle. There was only the sound of insects buzzing, humming. The ape-man lay looking in the direction from which had come the sounds of the approaching anthropoids. He knew what was transpiring behind that dense wall of foliage. He knew that presently a pair of fierce eyes would be examining him, surveying the clearing, searching for an enemy, warily probing for a trick or a trap. He knew that the first sight of him might arouse distrust, fear, rage. For what reason had they to love or trust the cruel and merciless Tarmangani? There lay great danger in the possibility that, seeing him, they might quietly withdraw without showing themselves. That, then, would be the end, for there were no others than the Mangani to whom he might look for rescue. With this in mind, he spoke. "I am a friend," he called to them. "The Tarmangani caught me and bound my wrists and ankles. I cannot move. I cannot defend myself. I cannot get food nor water. Come and remove my bonds." From just behind the screen of foliage a voice replied, "You are a Tarmangani." "I am Tarzan of the Apes," replied the ape-man. "Yes," screamed Manu, "he is Tarzan of the Apes. The Tarmangani and the Gomangani bound him and Tantor brought him here. 4 times has Kudu hunted across the sky while Tarzan of the Apes lay bound." "I know Tarzan," said another voice from behind the foliage, and presently the leaves parted and a huge shaggy ape lumbered into the clearing. Swinging along with knuckles to the ground, the brute came close to Tarzan. "Emwalat," exclaimed the ape-man. "It is Tarzan of the Apes," said the great ape, but the others did not understand what they demanded. "Whose band is this?" asked Tarzan. "Toyat is king," replied Emwalat. "Then do not tell them it is really I," whispered Tarzan, "until you have cut these bonds. Toyat hates me, he will kill me if I am defenseless. Yes, agreed Mwalat. Here, said Tarzan, raising his bound wrists, bite these bonds in two. You are Tarzan of the apes, the friend of Mwalat. Mwalat will do as you ask, replied the ape. Of course, in the meager language of the apes, their conversation did not sound at all like a conversation between men, but was rather a mixture of growls and grunts and gestures which, however, served every purpose that could have been served by the most formal and correct of civilized speech, since it carried its messages clearly to the minds of both the Mangani and the Tarmangani, the great ape and the great ape and the great white ape. As the other members of the band pressed forward into the clearing, seeing that Mwalat was not harmed, the latter stooped and with powerful teeth severed the camel leather thongs that secured the wrists of the ape man, and similarly he freed his ankles. As Tarzan came to his feet, the balance of the fierce and shaggy band swung into the clearing. In the lead was Toyat, king ape, and at his heels 8 more full-grown males with perhaps 6 or 7 females and a number of young. The young and the shes hung back, but the bulls pressed forward to where Tarzan stood with Mwalat at his side. The king ape growled menacingly. Tarmangani, he cried. Wheeling in a circle, he leaped into the air and came down on all fours. He struck the ground savagely with his clenched fists. He growled and foamed and leaped again and again. Toyat was working himself to a pitch of rage that would nerve him to attack the Tarmangani, and by these maneuvers he hoped also to arouse the savage fighting spirit of his fellows. It is Tarzan of the apes, friend of the Mangani, said Mwalat. It is a Tarmangani, enemy of the Mangani, cried Toyat. They come with great thundersticks and kill us. They make our Shias and our Balas dead with a loud noise. Kill the Tarmangani. It is Tarzan of the apes, growled Gayat. When I was a little Balu, he saved me from Numa. Tarzan of the apes is the friend of the Mangani. Kill the Tarmangani, shrieked Toyat, leaping high into the air. Several of the other bulls were now circling and leaping into the air as Gayat placed himself at Tarzan's side. The ape man knew them well. He knew that sooner or later one of them would have excited himself to such a pitch of maniacal frenzy that he would leap suddenly upon him. Mwalat and Gayat would attack in his defense. Several more bulls would launch themselves into the battle, and there would ensue a free-for-all fight from which not all of them would emerge alive, and none without more or less serious injuries. But Tarzan of the apes did not wish to battle with his friends. Stop, he commanded, raising his open palm to attract attention. I am Tarzan of the apes, mighty hunter, mighty fighter. Long did I range with the tribe of Kerchak. When Kerchak died, I became king ape. Many of you know me, all know that I am first a Mangani, and that I am friend to all Mangani. Toyat would have you kill me because Toyat hates Tarzan of the apes. He hates him not because he is a Tarmangani, but because Tarzan once kept Toyat from becoming king. That was many reigns ago when some of you were still Balas. If Toyat has been a good king, Tarzan is glad, but now he is not acting like a good king, for he is trying to turn you against your best friend. You, Zuto, he exclaimed, suddenly pointing a finger at a huge bull. You leap and growl and foam at the mouth. You would sink your fangs into the flesh of Tarzan. Have you forgotten, Zuto? The time that you were sick and the other members of the tribe left you to die? Have you forgotten who brought you food and water? Have you forgotten who it was that kept Saber the lioness and Sheeta the panther and Dengo the hyena from you during those long nights? As Tarzan spoke, his tone one of quiet authority, the apes gradually paused to listen to his words. It was a long speech for the jungle folk. The great apes nor the little monkeys long concentrated upon one idea. Already before he had finished, one of the bulls was overturning a rotted log in search of succulent insects. Zuto was wrinkling his brows in unaccustomed recollection. Presently he spoke. Zuto remembers, he said. He is the friend of Tarzan and ranged himself beside Mwalat. With this the other bulls, except Toyat, appeared to lose interest in the proceedings and either wandered off in search of food or squatted down in the grass. Toyat still fumed, but as he saw his cause deserted, he prosecuted his war dance at a safer distance from Tarzan and his defenders, and it was not long before he too was attracted by the more profitable business of bug hunting. And so Tarzan ranged again with the great apes. And as he loafed lazily through the forest with the shaggy brutes, he thought of his foster mother, Kala, the great she-ape, the only mother he had ever known. He recalled with a thrill of pride her savage defense of him against all their natural enemies of the jungle, and against the hate and jealousy of old Tublat, her mate, and against the enmity of Kerchak, the terrible old king ape. As it had been but yesterday since he had seen him, Tarzan's memory projected again upon the screen of recollection the huge bulk and the ferocious features of old Kerchak. What a magnificent beast he had been! To the childish mind of the ape-boy, Kerchak had been the personification of savage ferocity and authority, and even today he recalled him with almost a sensation of awe. That he had overthrown and slain this gigantic ruler still seemed to Tarzan almost incredible. He fought again his battles with Turkaz and with Bolgani the gorilla. He thought of Tika, whom he had loved, and of Paka and Tana, and of the little black boy Tibo, whom he had endeavored to adopt. And so he dreamed through lazy daylight hours while Ibn Jad crept slowly northward toward the leopard city of Nimr, and in another part of the jungle events were transpiring that were to entangle Tarzan in the meshes of a great adventure. Chapter 4. Bolgani the gorilla. A black porter caught his foot in an entangling creeper and stumbled, throwing his load to the ground. Of such trivialities are crises born. This one altered the entire life of James Hunter Blake, young, rich American hunting big game for the first time in Africa with his friend Wilbur Stimble, who, having spent 3 weeks in the jungle 2 years before, was naturally the leader of the expedition and an infallible authority on all matters pertaining to big game, African jungle, safari, food, weather, and Negroes. The further fact that Stimble was 25 years Blake's senior naturally but augmented his claims to omniscience. These factors did not in themselves constitute the basis for the growing differences between the two men, for Blake was a phlegmatically inclined young man of 25 who was rather amused at Stimble's egotism than otherwise. The first rift had occurred at Railhead when, through Stimble's domineering manner and ill temper, the entire purpose of the expedition had been abandoned by necessity. And what was to have been a quasi-scientific motion picture camera study of wild African life had resolved itself into an ordinary big game hunt. At Railhead, while preparations were going on to secure equipment and a safari, Stimble had so offended and insulted the cameraman that he had left them flat and returned to the coast. Blake was disappointed, but he made up his mind to go on through and get what pictures he could with a still camera. He was not a man who enjoyed killing for the mere sport of taking life, and as originally planned there was to have been no shooting of game except for food and half a dozen trophies that Stimble particularly wished to add to his collection. There had since been 1 or 2 altercations relative to Stimble's treatment of the black porters, but these matters, Blake was hopeful, had been ironed out, and Stimble had promised to leave the handling of the safari to Blake and refrain from any further abuse of the men. They had come into the interior even farther than they had planned, had had the poorest of luck in the matter of game, and were about to turn back toward Railhead. It seemed now to Blake that, after all, they were going to pull through without further difficulty, and that he and Stimble would return to America together, to all intent and purpose still friends. But just then a black porter caught his foot in an entangling creeper and stumbled, throwing his load to the ground. Directly in front of the porter, Stimble and Blake were walking side by side, and, as though guided by a malevolent power, the load crashed into Stimble, hurling him to the ground. Stimble and the porter scrambled to their feet amidst the laughter of the Negroes who had witnessed the accident. The porter was grinning. Stimble was flushed with anger. "You damned clumsy nigger," he cried, and before Blake could interfere or the porter protect himself, the angry white man stepped quickly over the fallen load and struck the black a terrific blow in the face that felled him, and as he lay there, Stimble kicked him in the side. But only once. Before he could repeat the outrage, Blake seized him by the shoulder, wheeled him about, and struck him precisely as he had struck the black. Stimble fell, rolled over on his side, and reached for the automatic that hung at his hip, but quick as he was, Blake was quicker. "Cut that," said Blake, crisply, covering Stimble with a .45. Stimble's hand dropped from the grip of his gun. "Get up," ordered Blake, and when the other had risen, "Now listen to me, Stimble, this is the end. You and I are through. Tomorrow morning we split the safari in equipment, and whichever way you go with your half, I'll go in the opposite direction." Blake had returned his gun to its holster as he spoke. The black had risen and was nursing a bloody nose. The other blacks were looking on sullenly. Blake motioned to the porter to pick up his load, and presently the safari was again on the move, a sullen safari without laughter or song. Blake made camp at the first available ground shortly before noon, in order that the division of equipment, food and men could be made during the afternoon, and the 2 safarists thus be enabled to make an early start the following morning. Stimble, sullen, would give no assistance, but taking a couple of the askari, the armed natives who act as soldiers for the safari, started out from camp to hunt. He had proceeded scarcely a mile along a mold-padded game trail which gave forth no sound in answer to their falling footsteps, when one of the natives in the lead held up his hand in warning as he halted in his tracks. Stimble advanced cautiously and the black pointed toward the left, through the foliage. Dimly Stimble saw a black mass moving slowly away from them. "What is it?" he whispered. "Gorilla," replied the black. Stimble raised his rifle and fired at the retreating figure. The black was not surprised that he missed. "Hell," ejaculated the white. "Come on, get after him. I've got to have him. Gad, what a trophy he'll make." The jungle was rather more open than usual, and again they came within sight of the retreating gorilla. Each time Stimble fired and each time he missed. Secretly the blacks were amused and pleased. They did not like Stimble. At a distance, Tarzan of the apes, hunting with the tribe of Toyat, heard the first shot and immediately took to the trees and was racing in the direction of the sound. He felt sure that the weapon had not been discharged by the Bedouins, for he well knew and could differentiate between the reports of their muskets and those made by modern weapons. Perhaps he thought there may be among them such a rifle, because such was not impossible, but more likely it meant white men, and in Tarzan's country it was his business to know what strangers were there and why. Seldom they came even now, though once they had never come. It was those days that Tarzan regretted, for when the white man comes, peace and happiness depart. Racing through the trees, swinging from limb to limb, Tarzan of the apes unerringly followed the direction of the sound of the succeeding shots, and as he approached more closely the scene of the pursuit of Bolgani the gorilla, he heard the crashing of underbrush and the voices of men. Bolgani, fleeing with greater haste than caution, his mind and attention occupied by thoughts of escape from the hated Tarmangani and the terrifying thunder stick that roared each time the Tarmangani came within sight of him, abandoned his accustomed wariness and hurried through the jungle, forgetful of what few other enemies might beset his path, and so it was that he failed to see Hista the snake draped in sinuous loops along an overhanging branch of a nearby patriarch of the forest. The huge python, naturally short-tempered and irritable, had been disturbed and annoyed by the crashing sounds of pursuit and escape and the roaring voice of the rifle. Ordinarily he would have permitted a full-grown bull gorilla to pass unmolested, but in his present state of mind he might have attacked even Tantor himself. His beady eyes glaring fixedly, he watched the approach of the shaggy Bolgani, and as the gorilla passed beneath the limb to which he clung, Hista launched himself upon his prey. As the great coils, powerful, relentless, silent, encircled Bolgani, he sought to tear the hideous folds from him. Great is the strength of Bolgani, but even greater is that of Hista the snake. A single hideous, almost human scream burst from the lips of Bolgani with the first realization of the disaster that had befallen him, and then he was on the ground tearing futilely at the steadily tightening bands of living steel that would crush the life from him. Crush until his bones gave to the tremendous pressure, until only broken pulp remained within a sausage-like thing that would slip between the distended jaws of the serpent. It was upon this sight that Stimble and Tarzan came simultaneously, Stimble stumbling awkwardly through the underbrush, Tarzan of the apes, demigod of the forest, swinging gracefully through the foliage of the middle terraces. They arrived simultaneously, but Tarzan was the only one of the party whose presence was unsuspected by the others, for, as always, he had moved silently, and with the utmost wariness because of the unknown nature of the conditions he might discover. As he looked down upon the scene below, his quick eye and his knowledge of the jungle revealed at a glance the full story of the tragedy that had overtaken Bolgani, and then he saw Stimble raise his rifle, intent upon bagging two royal specimens with a single shot. In the heart of Tarzan was no great love for Bolgani the gorilla. Since childhood the shaggy giant man-beast had been the natural foe of the ape-man. His first mortal combat had been with Bolgani. For years he had feared him, or rather avoided him through caution, for of fear Tarzan was ignorant, and since he had emerged from childhood he had continued to avoid Bolgani for the simple reason that his own people, the great apes, avoided him. But now when he saw the huge brute beset by two of the natural enemies of both the Mangani and the Bolgani, there flared within his breast a sudden loyalty that burned away the personal prejudices of a lifetime. He was directly above Stimble, and with such celerity do the mind and muscles of the ape-man coordinate that even as the American raised his weapon to his shoulder, Tarzan had dropped upon his back, felling him to the earth, and before Stimble could discover what had happened to him. Long before he could stumble, cursing, to his feet, Tarzan, who had been unarmed, had snatched the hunter's knife from its scabbard and leaped full upon the writhing, struggling mass of python and gorilla. Stimble came to his feet ready to kill, but what he saw before him temporarily drove the desire for vengeance from his mind. Naked but for a loincloth, bronzed, black-haired, a giant white man battled with the dread python, and as Stimble watched he shuddered as he became aware that the low, beast-like growls he heard came not alone from the savage lips of the gorilla but from the throat of the godlike man-thing that fought for him. Steel fingers encircled the python just back of its head, while those of the free hand drove Stimble's hunting knife again and again into the coiling, writhing body of the serpent. With the projection of a new and more menacing enemy into the battle, Hista was forced partially to release his hold upon Bolgani with, at first, the intention of including Tarzan in the same embrace that he might crush them both at once. But soon he discovered that the hairless man-thing constituted a distinct menace to his life that would necessitate his undivided attention. And so he quickly uncoiled from about Bolgani, and in a frenzy of rage and pain that whipped his great length into a lashing fury of destruction he sought to encircle the ape-man, but wheresoever his coils approached, the keen knife bit deep into tortured flesh. Bolgani, the spark of life all but crushed from him, lay gasping upon the ground, unable to come to the aid of his preserver, while Stimble, goggle-eyed with awe and terror, kept at a safe distance, momentarily forgetful both of his lust for trophies and his bent for revenge. Thus was Tarzan pitted single-handed against one of the mightiest of nature's creations in a duel to the death, the result of which seemed to the watching American already a foregone conclusion, for what man born of woman could hope, unaided, to escape from the embrace of the deadly coils of a python. Already Hista had encircled the torso and one leg of the ape-man, but his powers of constriction, lessened by the frightful wounds he had received, had as yet been unable to crush his adversary into helplessness. And Tarzan was now concentrating his attention and the heavy blade of the hunting knife upon a single portion of the weakening body in an attempt to cut Hista in two. Man and serpent were red with blood, and crimson were the grasses and the brush for yards in all directions as, with a final effort, Hista closed his giant coils spasmodically about his victim at the instant that Tarzan, with a mighty upward heavy lunge, cut through the vertebrae of the great snake. Lashing and writhing, the nether portion, headless, flopped aside while the ape-man, still fighting with what remained, exerting his superhuman strength to its ultimate utmost, slowly forced the coils from about his body and cast the dying Hista from him. Then, without a glance at Stimble, he turned to Bolgani. "You are hurt to death?" he asked in the language of the great apes. "No," replied the gorilla. "I am Bolgani. I kill Tarmangani." "I am Tarzan of the apes," said the ape-man. "I saved you from Hista." "You did not come to kill Bolgani?" inquired the gorilla. "No." "Let us be friends." Bolgani frowned in an effort to concentrate upon this remarkable problem. Presently he spoke. "We will be friends," he said. "The Tarmangani behind you will kill us both with his thunder stick. Let us kill him first." Painfully he staggered to his feet. "No," remonstrated Tarzan. "I will send the Tarmangani away." "You? He will not go." "I am Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle," replied the ape-man. The word of Tarzan is law in the jungle. Stimble, who had been watching, was under the impression that the man and the beast were growling at one another and that a new duel impended. Had he guessed the truth and suspicioned that they considered him a common enemy, he would have felt far less at ease. Now his rifle regained, he started toward Tarzan just as the latter turned to address him. "Stand to one side, young fellow," said Stimble, "while I finish that gorilla. After the experience you just had with the snake, I doubt if you want that fellow to jump you too." The American was none too sure of what the attitude of the white giant might be, for all too fresh in his mind was the startling and disconcerting manner of the wild man's introduction, but he felt safe because he held a rifle, while the other was unarmed. And he guessed that the giant might be only too glad to be saved from the attentions of the gorilla, which, from Stimble's imagined knowledge of such beasts, appeared to him to be quite evidently threatening. Tarzan halted directly between Bolgani and the hunter and eyed the latter appraisingly for a moment. "Lower your rifle," he said presently. "You are not going to shoot the gorilla." "The hell I'm not," ejaculated Stimble. "What do you suppose I've been chasing him through the jungle for?" "Under a misapprehension," replied Tarzan. "What misapprehension?" demanded Stimble. "That you were going to shoot him. You are not." "Say, young man, do you know who I am?" demanded Stimble. "I am not interested," replied Tarzan coldly. Well, you'd better be. I'm Wilbur Stimble of Stimble Company Brokers, New York. That was a name to conjure with in New York. Even in Paris and London it had opened many a door, bent many a knee. Seldom had it failed the purpose of this arrogant man. What are you doing in my country? Demanded the ape man, ignoring Stimble's egotistical statement of his identity. Your country? Who the hell are you? Tarzan turned toward the two blacks, who had been standing a little in the rear of Stimble and to one side. I am Tarzan of the Apes, he said to them in their own dialect. What is this man doing in my country? How many are there in his party? How many white men? Big Bwana, replied one of the men with sincere deference. We knew that you were Tarzan of the Apes when we saw you swing from the trees and slay the great snake. There is no other in all the jungle who could do that. This white man is a bad master. There is one other white man with him. The other is kind. They came to hunt Simba the lion and other big game. They have had no luck. Tomorrow they turn back. Where is their camp? Demanded Tarzan. The black who had spoken pointed. It is not far, he said. The ape man turned to Stimble. Go back to your camp, he said. I shall come there later this evening and talk with you and your companion. In the meantime, hunt no more except for food in Tarzan's country. There was something in the voice and manner of the stranger that had finally gone through Stimble's thick sensibilities and impressed him with a species of awe, a thing he had scarcely ever experienced in the past, except in the presence of wealth that was grossly superior to his own. He did not reply. He just stood and watched the bronze giant turn to the gorilla. He heard them growl at one another for a moment, and then, to his vast surprise, he saw them move off through the jungle together, shoulder to shoulder. As the foliage closed about them, he removed his helmet and wiped the sweat from his forehead with a silken handkerchief as he stood staring at the green branches that had parted to receive this strangely assorted pair. Finally, he turned to his men with an oath. A whole day wasted, he complained. Who is this fellow? You seem to know him. He is Tarzan, replied one of the blacks. Tarzan? Never heard of him, snapped Stimble. All who know the jungle know Tarzan. Humph, sneered Stimble. No lousy wild man is going to tell Wilbur Stimble where he can hunt and where he can't. Master, said the black who had first spoken, the word of Tarzan is the law of the jungle. Do not offend him. I'm not paying you damned niggers for advice, snapped Stimble. If I say hunt, we hunt, and don't you forget it. But on their return to camp they saw no game, or at least Stimble saw none. What the blacks saw was their own affair.